Hello, good evening, friends. So, here I, Kunal Nagpal, once again welcome you back to this great economic forum. So, dear friends, I hope you all are doing good in your respective lives. Today we are basically going to discuss the golden news highlights or the golden updates for our economy and for the global economy also. Dear friends, basically we are going to discuss three news highlights. Firstly, the government steps helped RBI, that is the Reserve Bank of India, tame inflation. We are basically going to analyze how did the government of India coordinated with the RBI efforts to reduce inflation at a considerable level. Secondly, we are basically going to discuss the current rate of unemployment. That is, unemployment rate rises to 8% in November, as per the recent data collected by the CMIE. This is actually not so encouraging because when we will analyze this in detail, we would see that the urban unemployment has risen to a great level if we do the comparative analysis with that of the unemployment rate in the rural population. Thirdly, we would very intricately go through the question answer session with one of the great research scholar. That is, China sees its economy purely as a means to enhance the power of the state. Its zero COVID strategy is impacting the growth now. So this is the international news, and we will have the great question answer session on this particular topic as well. So let's begin. Government steps helped the Reserve Bank of India tame inflation. India's dedicated administrative measures such as release of grains, selective curbs on exports of farm produce and timely exports have basically helped prevent inflation in food prices and aided the central bank's efforts at restraining broader inflation through a period of protracted supply disruptions globally. Even as the global food and fertilizer prices rose following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, food price inflation in India remained relatively muted. Higher subsidies on fertilizers and excise duty cuts for the petroleum products have blunted the inflationary impact of the Russia-Ukraine war, which has contributed to reducing inflation differentials between India and the rest of the world, said Rahul Bajoria, Chief India Economist, Barclays Capital. New Delhi undertook two main measures to absorb the commodity supply shock that followed the pandemic shock. It increased food subsidy by 1.3 lakh crore rupees, that is 0.5% of the gross domestic product, and distributed a total of 20.2 million tons of rice and 12.2 million tons of wheat since March 2022 under the public distribution system at subsidized rates. The fertilizer subsidy helped contain food inflation by partly arresting a pass-through of farm input costs to food inflation, said Shantanu Sen Gupta, Chief India Economist, Goldman Sachs. While farm input inflation rose around 25%, food inflation was contained at around 6%. Fiscal concessions were possible due to the fiscal space created by the buoyant revenues. Therefore, strong revenue, particularly from direct and indirect taxes, has been a key tailwind to consolidation efforts, also benefiting from hastened formalization and better due diligence. This has helped offset a bigger subsidy bill undertake administrative measures to absorb price increases, said Ms. Radhika Rao, senior economist at DBS Bank. With energy prices coming off the boil and inflation peak behind us, the policy committee is basically expected to retain a hawkish tilt but move in smaller increments. But the fiscal policy would need to be restrictive over the longer period. This means that the fiscal policy, while expansionary in the near term, will need to turn slightly more restrictive in the medium term, which could either push up inflation through GST or fuel duty hikes or push down growth through expenditure rationalization, which should help ensure macro stability in the medium term, said Bajoria. Goldman Sachs forecasts headline retail inflation to decrease to 6.1% on year in 2023 from 6.8% year on year in 2022, as active government intervention is likely to cap food inflation. Going forward, it sees some upside risk to cereal inflation due to estimated decline in production and depletion of inventories. Also, sowing of pulses in the Kharif, that is the summer season, was 6% less compared to the last year and is likely to affect its production. So, dear friends, we basically see that how the better coordination between the Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India helped taming inflation at a considerable level. Now going forward, let's discuss another important news of great significance. So, my dear friends, now we are basically going to discuss how the unemployment rate rises to 8% in November as per the CMIE data. We would be able to analyze that how this unemployment rate rose to the unfavorable level, especially the rural segment, especially for the rural segment of the population. India's unemployment rate surged to 8% in November from 7.7% in October on account of significant increase in joblessness in urban India, showed data from the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, that is CMIE. The data showed that unemployment rate in urban India went up to 8.96% in November from 7.21% in the previous month, that is October, while the unemployment rate in rural India fell to 7.55% from 8.04%. The unemployment rate of 8% in November is the second highest in this financial year so far, with the highest being 8.28% registered in August. Unemployment rate in India stood at 7.83% in April, that is 7.14% if we do the comparative analysis with that of May, then 7.83% in June and 6.83% in July. So we can see that in May it's nearly 7.14%. Then in June it is 7.83%, and then it further fell to 6.83% in July. But then in August it rose significantly to 8.28%, followed with 8% in November. The Center for Monitoring Indian Economy basically said the employment by the listed companies crossed the 10 million mark in 2021-22, an all-time high and an increase of 9.3% over 9.3 million in 2020-21. These estimates are basically based on the data provided by 3,315 companies in their annual financial statements for the 2021-22 year and 2020-21 year, it said in its weekly labor market analysis. According to the CMIE, during the previous 3 years, that is 2018-19, 2019-20, and 2020-21, about 3,400 companies had reported total employment of about 9.3 to 9.4 million. In contrast, a slightly smaller set of 3,315 companies reported a higher total employment of nearly 10.1 million, it said. So, dear guys, we notice that the rate of unemployment is actually significantly high in the month of November if we do the specific study for the urban segment of the population. So we basically need to work together, and the concerned authorities specifically need to work very hard in order to determine the reason for this rising rate of unemployment and hence employ effective measures to eradicate the same. Now, going forward, let's discuss the basic news of international concern, wherein we will see the question answer round with one of the renowned research scholar. China sees its economy purely as a means to enhance the power of the state. Its zero COVID strategy is actually impacting growth now. By Srijana Mitra Das, ET Bureau. First question being asked to the great pioneer is, what is the core of your research? To which the great pioneer, Mr. Jeremy S. Friedman, answers, I have written about the history of socialism and revolution in the Cold War. I'm also increasingly researching business and geopolitics. He basically teaches at the Harvard Business School, that is HBS. Speaking to Srijana Mitra Das, he discusses the ongoing protests in China and their deeper economic roots with the proper root cause analysis. Are the current protests in China linked to the economy? To which he answers, these are connected in part to the economy. Growth in China has reduced partially due to the zero COVID policy, and people are concerned. University students, for instance, are a prominent part of these protests, and they are very much worried about their economic future with these measures. Next question asked to this great pioneer is, what is the likely outcome of these protests? To which Mr. Jeremy replies, we don't know how much wider they will get, but many people in China had been expecting some relaxation of the COVID-19 measures after the Chinese Communist Party, that is CCP, Congress in October. The government did mean to begin, but it can't look like it's caving to the voices it sees as undermining its authority. Xi Jinping has just begun his third term and taken complete control of the CCP hierarchy. He cannot risk a show of weakness. Next, Jeremy was asked, could China's unrest impact the world economy at large, given its role in manufacturing and supply chains? There are diverse likely scenarios. To which he replies, a prolonged slowdown in China could actually lead to a decrease in demand for oil and gas, which could actually ease some price pressures. Alternatively, this unrest could create more supply chain disruptions, raising the prices, driving the Fed to increase the interest rates, which could push the global economy into a recession trajectory. If the protests are not contained and the government does not change its stance, this could actually have a huge impact. It's quite worrisome, actually. Next question being asked is, why has China's management of the pandemic turned out differently compared to the other planned and socialist-oriented economies? To which he answers, China basically works on a much larger scale, dealing with a massive population and an enormous terrain. It also considers itself in direct competition with the United States. This makes it imperative for it to stick to the narrative of having done a much better job at handling the pandemic. Case numbers in the United States were quite gleefully circulated in China. I think the unwillingness to change course now is also reflective of the way the government has tied its prestige to this narrative. They have also been involved in vaccine development with differing claims of effectiveness and vaccine diplomacy. These were not just about China's generosity and aid programs, but also its techno-scientific expertise in competition with the West. So with China's international standing and domestic legitimacy tied to this narrative, many political factors are involved in its response to the pandemic. These have impacted the policy decisions in ways other countries haven't experienced. Does China pose a paradox, offering both socialism and consumerism? For a long time, people thought the Chinese regime legitimized itself based on the economic growth it provided its people. I think that was never true. The uniting thread in China's communism has always been anti-imperialism and re-establishing China as a global power able to stand up to the Western might. This stemmed from a sense of humiliation developed into a narrative by the CCP. Under Mao, the belief was a centrally planned economy would strengthen China. Gradually, that was seen as ineffective and market reforms were introduced to help the economy grow. But this was never about abandoning the state control or allowing capitalism to run free. China's liberalization was about using the market to grow the economy in order to increase the power of the state. For some time, corruption increased, causing discontent, and Xi Jinping's nightmare was presiding over a USSR-like deterioration. That's why he tried to rebalance some power between the party and the private sector. But this is all in the same framework, which is that the role of the Chinese economy to increase the power of the state or the party and enhance the country's standing. The last question put to this great pioneer is, America has recently passed key legislation concerning China. How will this impact the industry? To which Mr. Jeremy answers, the US is increasingly focused on regulating inbound and outgoing investments. A growing share of global economy will be impacted by the national security concerns, with definitions of national security and ways of regulation expanding. That does not mean the United States businesses will have to move all their operations back home, though friendshoring could be a viable option which holds an opportunity for India. Additionally, in the United States, following the Me Too and Black Lives Matter, it has become expected for the companies to highlight their values about social issues. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the companies are also expected to take a position on international issues. Actions like the US Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act become even more significant in this context. We will see more companies feeling the need to assert their value on both ethical issues and national concerns. So, dear friends, this was basically the dialogue or the question answer session with the great pioneer, Mr. Jeremy, who is the research scholar, and he presented his far-sighted visionary views with the great ET economist. So, on this note, I would like to end today's session. I hope that today's news highlights will basically awaken you on the basic functioning of our economy. The key highlights which were discussed, I would like to summarize them once again. That is, it was appreciated that the overall coordination between the Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India finally helped tame inflation for the Indian economy. Secondly, we analyzed that the unemployment rate has actually increased in the Indian economy if we consider specifically the urban segment of the population for India. We note that unemployment has risen significantly if we talk specifically about the month of November. So we did a comparative analysis with all the preceding months since starting since May 2022. Then finally, we studied the international news of great concern, that is the views presented by the great research scholar Mr. Jeremy S. Friedman on how he sees China and its economy purely as a means to enhance the power of the state, its zero COVID strategy, whether it's impacting the growth now. And we saw various outlooks on this particular topic regarding the overall strategies being put in force by the American economy as well. That is, we considered the pattern of rivalry between China and America, and what are the prospective solutions for this particular problem. So on this note, I would like to end today's session, and I hope this session would help you to enlighten your overall intellect with the overall significance of the news relevant to the Indian economy and the global economy as a whole. Thank you so much. Namaskar. Jai Hind.